first panel, what I did was I'll introduce each individual speaker and they get to speak. Still waiting on one more. And I'm not good at buying time. No joke. Yes, we can go and get started. Cathy Wursterbarth is a citizen working to address PFAS contamination coming from the former Worth Air Force Base in Oscoda, Michigan, and co-leader of the Now Need Our Water local action group.
Thank you very much. Those were very hard acts to follow. If you're familiar with PFAS, it's pretty young in its discovery, at least throughout Michigan. And so I'm actually really new at this. We heard from some very seasoned activists, and I was very inspired by that. And you know, it's just inspiring. And I was glad to see that, you know, I'm sure everybody feels frustrated about these situations, but the choral group really showed that sometimes you have to just laugh, otherwise you're just going to go crazy. So, if you'll forgive me because I am new at this, I'm going to read a little bit. But PFAS is making headlines across the nation and in our hometowns, and for good reason. This forever chemical is harming Michigan families, and it's costing us our health. State secrecy and the lack of transparency have run through the veins of the PFAS contamination discovery in Michigan and deprived Michiganders of a complete understanding of the scope of which we are being affected. We know this, as people have indicated, water is crucial, water is life-giving, and it's basic. To deny it is to deny safe, clean access to life itself. After all, we're all made up of water. We should be able to trust our drinking water is safe to use, to give to our kids, but that's not the case for dozens of communities in Michigan. PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are a group of man-made chemicals that include PFOS, Jennings, and many others. PFAS have been manufactured and used in a variety of industries around the globe, including the U.S. since the 1940s. PFOA and PFOS, the most extensively produced and studied, they can be found in the food supply, in stain and water repellent products, firefighting foam, and in our water due to contamination. No matter who you are, you probably already have PFAS in your blood. In fact, it's in our blood, almost everyone's blood. And it's a result of the widespread PFAS use in the 20th century. These chemicals are long-lasting and build up in our bodies over time, meaning that it's not a chemical that quickly passes through your system. Instead, it stays put. If you continue to ingest PFAS, whether through contaminated water or toxins in the air, that accumulates in your blood and increases your risk for health complications, such as cancers, thyroid problems, learning and developmental challenges in children, liver effects, low birth weights, and the list goes on. As we stand right now, there are 46 PFAS contaminated sites in Michigan, and we expect to see even more. At its highest levels are 490,000 parts per trillion, far exceeding the 1 part per trillion a Harvard professor estimates as safe. Michigan isn't the only place where PFAS contamination is a threat to drinking water. It's an issue for dozens of states in the U.S. and for many countries. Still, our beautiful state is at the top of the list for PFAS contamination sites, a claim to fame we do not want. With Michigan topping the list for most PFAS contaminated sites, you'd think we'd have a drinking water standard set to protect Michiganders. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The U.S. EPA set the lifetime health advisory standard for PFAS in water at 70 parts per trillion. That may sound tiny, but the CDC reports the EPA tried to conceal make it abundantly clear that this standard is dangerously high. The report states that the standard could be up to 6 times too high. And when children in Rockford, Michigan have PFAS blood levels as high as 484,000 parts per trillion, we know we're putting our families directly in harm's way. There have been more than a few instances of secrecy in the fight to understand why so many Michigan communities are reeling in the reality of contaminated drinking water. In Plainfield Township, state regulators violate open meetings acts about contamination, and recently we discovered that our own Michigan DEQ suppressed a report for 6 years that warned of PFAS contamination in our state and proposed measures to protect families in areas like Oscoda and Rockford with record high levels. Instead, the state of Michigan waited until the author of the report, the site manager, the location in Oscoda, Michigan, Bob Delaney, went on the radio in the fall of 2017 and reported his suppressed report. Only then did the state create a task force called MPARC, Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, to keep the residents it was charged to protect. Imagine the harm that could have been prevented if our government acted quickly. Now we feel the impacts of PFAS contamination for decades to come, as one Rockford toddler now lives with PFAS levels in his blood as much as 6,900 times more than the EPA inadequate standard. Instead of solutions, we face challenges. It seems that each step along the way, Michiganders have been faced with a lack of transparency. Instead of sharing the information that agencies like the DEQ, the Department of Defense, and the EPA have, they swept it under the rug despite the cost to our families and communities. It's time to start asking more. It's time. Our health is on the line, and our families, our communities, and our water.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'd like to really thank Charles Farrow for all he's done to bring the community beautiful tribute to our sister Lila Cabell this evening,
Yes.
as well as the other risen water warriors. There's so much about water that's going on these days. We started talking about shutoffs and drinking water, and then once everything started going around with that, we started seeing and looking and experiencing the devastating effects of water contamination here in the city as well as across the country. There was a mention a moment ago about a film that's being prepared now for the People's Water Board and the National Coalition for Legislation on Affordable Water. That film will be directed at various locations around the country. The film has already been filmed. It's now being edited in New York by Kate Levy. Many of you know her work. She's been to the Navajo Nation. She's filmed here in Detroit. She has filmed in Iowa. She's filmed in Martin County, Kentucky. She's filmed in Philadelphia. And what we know for sure is that the issue of water, not only affordability, but also contamination, is truly going to be one of the issues for our time. My dear friend Grace Lee Boggs was very, very strong on saying that each generation out of relative obscurity must define its mission and either fulfill it or betray it. And I believe that for many people here today, as well as young people yet to be born, water affordability, water contamination, water accessibility, what we found in the Navajo Nation as we filmed them is that many of the families have to travel to get big barrels of water, sometimes waiting for 3 hours, sometimes traveling distances of many miles to get water just to have accessibility. The same thing is happening up in the Upper Peninsula. It's not always far away, sometimes it's close to our home. So I want to start profiling the film. One reason is because it's going to be dedicated to our beloved Lila Cabell, and it grew out of the love here in Detroit that we have for the people here, and it will be localized in that way, but we've also traveled throughout the country to prepare that for you. I want to also share with you, and I realize we're running behind time, and this is something I could talk about for several hours, several days, a month, you know. So let me just say that there's a danger in our community. It's called U.S. ecology.
Yes.
And Diane Weckerle is going to speak about it in more detail. But what they are doing right now as we sit here is they are taking in frack wastewater. They are bringing it and trucking it from all over the Midwest and beyond. And they are taking it right there on the east side of Detroit on Georgia Street and attempting to clean it. Now, because I've filed and our law firm is involved in an environmental justice case against actually 5 other polluters that are in that very short area of the city, I know that U.S. Ecology did not have a working air clean system or baghouse scrubber from its plant. And what it was doing was opening the door and allowing the chemicals and material to float directly into the community. And MDEQ knew this, and they allowed it. So keep your eyes and ears open for developments with U.S. Ecology on the east side of Detroit on Georgia, and the work that has to be done because they're taking the water and they're dumping it right into the sewers after they allegedly cleaned it, and they have been out of compliance with the EPA, with the state of Michigan MDEQ on just a chronic problem with coming out of compliance. They don't have any intention of even fixing it. They're making big bucks over there on Georgia, poisoning our communities, and we simply are not going to have it. So for those of you who are not involved in the movement for safe, clean, affordable water, and just look no further than the east side of Detroit and get involved with Mark Covington and Diane and others who have, are fighting so hard on that issue. Thank you.
Diane Weckerle is a retired Detroit public health nurse who works with lead-poisoned children and their families. She is co-chair of the Coalition to Oppose the Expansion of U.S. Ecology in Detroit and is active with the People's Water Board.
Thank you, Mark.
I just want to give a little context to this, the formation of this coalition 4 years ago. We're coming up on the 5th anniversary of the Flint water crisis, when the water was switched over. I was just told by a Flint water activist here. So we were all alert to this major problem that was taking place in Michigan, of residents and everybody just trying to get the word out that there was something wrong with their water, and not having anybody in the state take them seriously. So when we found out that this hazardous waste plant on the east side of Detroit was about to be expanded to 10 times its size, or 900%, we were alarmed, especially when all that liquid waste was going right down into the sewers below everybody's houses, which could overflow. And then there was a big exposure in the Detroit Free Press about the violations. Now, one of the things MDEQ has said all along is that, oh, it's safe and it's illegal. But when you have 150 violations of EPA rules on what's going into those sewers, that's not legal, and that's not safe. So they really have no justification for approving this, even though they've been insisting for almost 4 years that they're going to approve this. So there were groups in Detroit, there were groups in Hamtramck, they were all talking about how do we fight this. So we got together and we've been fighting it as a coalition ever since. A few months ago, a few immigrants walked into the coalition meeting. Arab American immigrants walked into the coalition meeting and said they wanted to join forces with us in this fight. And they didn't come empty-handed. They came with like a whole stack of petitions that they had already filled out against this expansion that they had already sent to the Governor Snyder.
All right. Yeah.
So that's really reinvigorated this whole fight. And even though Rosemary Robinson was asking if we could have another public hearing, because the first 2 public hearings back in the summer of 2015, only about 100 people showed up at each, and they were pretty much the same people because MDEQ didn't tell anybody else about it. Very few people knew that this hazardous waste plant even existed in the community. So now, one of the things that's come up recently is that the lawyer from the Biggs Environmental Law Center who's been working with us sent a letter to the governor and said, we really need to have another public hearing because there's been a lot that's changed and the community didn't know about it the first time around, so you need to have the community come and participate. And they said no. So he wrote back and said, yeah, but the first time you didn't translate anything, you didn't have any translators at those meetings, and so a huge part of the community surrounding the company was not allowed to participate, basically, in the discussion. So we've gone back and forth, and we finally won the right to have a meeting. MDEQ is holding a meeting next Thursday, the 28th, and we have flyers on the table downstairs. I can let you know about it. It's at 6 p.m. At the Bridge Academy on Buffalo Street, and we really encourage all of you to come and participate. And just speak out, and because pollution doesn't know any bounds. It's going to, go every place. One other thing I just wanted to say is, like, we were at a kind of memorial service earlier in the day about the tragedy in New Zealand, and how, we not only condemned the terrorist attack, but we were also denouncing Islamophobia. And we were talking about that, Islamophobia and racism you know, it just, there's a whole wide range of how this comes up. And so, one of the ways it comes up, and like, this is the first question, every time we talk about this in the community, the first question that comes up afterwards is like, why here? Why are they doing this here in the middle of this population center? And, you know, this is a real example of environmental racism. I mean, they go into poor communities, they go into communities of color, where there's immigrants, where they don't think the people are going to be able to fight back. And this has been documented all over the country. And so the struggles that we're waging on the environmental front, the struggle that we're waging on water affordability, is so connected to the struggle against racism. You fight the struggle against racism, like we're trying to do, you know, in the course of this struggle, and you will make the struggle, the environmental struggle, much stronger, and will strengthen, you know, the struggle against racism. So that's all I want to say. Did you want to?